I'm Michael Dalto with High Note Consulting, and this training is funded by the NEON project in the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy, known as ODEP. And we are being recorded. If you have not already typed your name into the chat, please do so, so you'll get credit for having attended today. So one day, Moses, Jesus, and God decide to play golf together. And Moses steps up to the first tee, which is a booming par five, and he hits a mighty swing, and the ball sails 500 yards, lands on the green, and dribbles to within 12 inches of the cup. And Jesus says, not bad, and steps up, hits an equally tremendous drive that lands on the green and dribbles to within 6 inches of the cup. And finally, God steps up to the key, hits an equally mighty swing, but tops the ball badly. It rolls about 50 yards. It's about to stop when suddenly an enormous golden eagle swoops down out of the sky, grasps the ball in its talons, flies out towards the green, keeps flying past the green. Suddenly, enormous hurricane force winds sweep into the eagle. It's flapping furiously. It's swept backwards until it's right over the green. A storm cloud appears overhead. Lightning flies out of the cloud, strikes the eagle on its tail. It shrieks, drops the ball, and the ball lands right in the cup. And Jesus says, are you going to screw around or are you going to play golf? And I think of that joke often when I think about our system of public benefits. You would think there would be an easier, simpler, more direct way for the rules for these benefits to work. You would think that Congress would have thought, let's make this a little simpler to understand. But if you think that, you would be wrong, obviously. We've got a whole variety of different public benefits that people may be receiving. Each of the rules, each of the benefits has a different set of rules. We need to learn all of them so that we can advise people about the impact of different levels of earnings on all benefits they receive. To make matters worse, some of the benefits have very similar rules, but there are key differences. So it's kind of like trying to learn Spanish and Italian at the same time. And to make matters even worse, although many of these benefits exist in every state, they have different, somewhat different rules in every state. And when you took the national training for benefits planners, either from Cornell or Virginia Commonwealth University, you learned that, in fact, these rules differ from state to state, and you were told you need to learn the rules in New York. But you may not have had access to a training to provide the New York State specific rules until today. So, what you learned in the national training was general information about benefits like Medicaid and SNAP and TANF and unemployment and workers' compensation. Um, but when you're advising New Yorkers about how work will affect their benefits, you need to know what the New York rules are. That's the goal of our training here. So if you're not on mute, please make sure to mute yourself. Also wanted to mention that I will be pausing frequently for questions. You can either type them into the chat or you can wait until I announce I'm taking questions and come off mute at that point. So if you don't know the New York State specific rules, it harms your credibility as a benefits planner because then you're in the position of telling people that you can give them a general idea of how different levels of earnings will affect certain benefits they get, but they have to go to the source, to the administering agency for those benefits to get better estimates. Um, a, a solid benefits planner should be able to give people estimates. You never tell people exactly how work will affect their benefits, but give them estimates about how different levels of earnings will affect those benefits so people can make truly informed choices about their earnings goals, whether to increase their earnings, whether to work, etc. Uh, so, in my opinion, the most important state-specific benefit we're going to be covering is the one we're covering today, and that's Medicaid. And the reason is, as you know, Medicaid is not only health insurance that covers medical expenses that you would expect health insurance to cover, but it also covers certain services like home and community-based services that people with disabilities rely on to be able to live and work in the community. So without Medicaid, people can't get these vital services and nothing else will matter. So there are actually dozens of different ways to qualify for Medicaid in the state of New York. Each way to qualify for Medicaid is called an eligibility group. Fortunately for you, we are not going to cover dozens of different ways to qualify for Medicaid. What we're going to focus on initially is six key ways, six common ways that people with disabilities who may be receiving benefits planning may qualify for Medicaid in New York. We're going to look kind of generally at the Medicaid program very quickly. Then we're going to look at those six common ways, key ways for New Yorkers with disabilities to get Medicaid, particularly adults with disabilities. We're going to look at the eligibility criteria for each of those six Medicaid eligibility groups. Then we're going to go through a variety of case examples where you'll have a person who starts out eligible for one Medicaid eligibility group, and then their situation changes. They start getting a different benefit. They start working. They increase their earnings. They get hospitalized, whatever it might be. And your job will be to figure out, are they still eligible for the Medicaid group that they started out in? And if so, that's great. If not, then you want to figure out, could they qualify for another one of the six Medicaid eligibility groups? Because a big part of our job as benefits planners is making sure that people who need Medicaid can continue to have access to it, particularly if they're working, increasing their earnings, saving money, etc. Before I go further, I did want to once again show you the other documents that you received an email last night that had 7 attachments. One was this PowerPoint. Another is the SSI Individual Calculation, because as probably most or all of you know, um, many of the Medicaid eligibility groups use the SSI rules for counting income. There's another one that's a countable income calculator specifically for the MBI-WPD, Medicaid Buy-in for Working Persons with Disabilities program. And you'll be using both of those spreadsheets during our exercises today. Next, you've got a sheet that summarizes the rules for modified adjusted gross income, known as MAGI. Those rules determine countable income for a couple of Medicaid eligibility groups we'll be looking at today, several. Then, rather than you having to sift through a whole bunch of PowerPoint slides when you're actually using these eligibility groups in practice. There's a New York Medicaid cheat sheet that goes through the 6 key eligibility groups and gives you basic information about them. So that'll be kind of a basic source for you when you're doing actual benefits planning. We have another PowerPoint that goes through a handful of other medical benefits that are important to know. And finally, a big comparison chart of New York medical benefits that goes through all of the medical benefits we'll be covering today and gives you lots of detailed information. This one really goes into the weeds and can be a source if you want to get deeper detail. Okay. And I'm going to pause for a moment um, and see if anyone has any questions currently. Okay, I'm not seeing anything in the chat other than letting me know you couldn't hear me before. Um, okay, Travis asks, how would I get these documents if they weren't emailed? There was no sign up for this course on NYESS where I found it. Yeah, I'm sorry, Travis. I will, when we have a break, be happy to forward the email to you. And I will ask you when we take the break to type your email into the chat. Don't do it yet because it may get kind of lost in other comments in the chat. Oh, Christopher's offering to send it to you. Wonderful. I don't need to. Um, and Gina needs the documents as well. Um, uh, okay, Jennifer as well. Thank you very much. Um, okay, great. Then I think we'll move ahead. So, a quick overview of the Medicaid program. So, Medicaid is a program that's jointly funded by the federal government and the state government in every state. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services funds it at the federal level. In New York, it's the New York State Department of Health. And Medicaid is a very important medical benefit that provides comprehensive health coverage to certain groups of people with generally with low incomes and for many Medicaid eligibility groups with low resources or assets. And to be eligible for Medicaid, a person has to be a member of a certain large category of people. There's a category for children, there's another one for pregnant people, there's another one for people who are disabled or at least age 65. By the way, Medicaid rules refer to age 65 or older as aged. I'm not going to do that. I recently turned 65, and 65 is not aged. Aged is 90. So I will say people are disabled or at least age 65. And secondly, people have to meet the criteria for a specific Medicaid eligibility group that applies to that large category of people. So there are large categories of people, and within them, there are specific Medicaid eligibility groups. And people have to meet the eligibility criteria for at least one of those specific groups to be eligible for Medicaid. One of them in New York is people who get SSI benefits. They are automatically eligible for Medicaid. Now, the federal government sets the basic rules for the Medicaid program, including which Medicaid eligibility groups are mandatory, which ones have to be offered by every state. But the Medicaid rules also give states lots of flexibility to choose how to customize their programs. There are a variety of possible Medicaid eligibility groups that are optional. States can choose to offer them or not. And there are a variety of other rules that states have flexibility to customize. So there's an old saying you may have heard, if you've seen one Medicaid program, you've seen one Medicaid program because every Medicaid program in every state is different. There are actually over 60 different possible Medicaid eligibility groups, both mandatory and optional, that states can use. No state has all of them, but every state has dozens of them, including New York. And fortunately, we're not going to be covering most of them. So, as I mentioned before, Medicaid covers some services, especially home and community-based services that people get through Medicaid waiver programs, personal attendant services, community behavioral health rehabilitation services that are offered covered by Medicaid, but other insurance will rarely cover or cover to the extent that Medicaid does. So that's the main reason Medicaid is so important to New Yorkers with disabilities. And in New York, some of the Medicaid eligibility groups also pay for most of the out-of-pocket Medicare costs that people would otherwise have to pay. A lot of people get both Medicare and Medicaid, and some of the Medicaid eligibility groups, a few of them, will not only cover the services that Medicaid covers, but they will basically wipe out um, Medicare Part B premiums and Medicare Part A and Part B deductibles and coinsurance for people who are getting both Medicare and Medicaid through these eligibility groups. And the eligibility groups, we'll cover this a bit later as well, that cover those Medicare costs are the SSI Medicaid group. If the person is getting SSI but is not eligible for qualified Medicare beneficiary, QIMBY, that we'll talk about later. The Pickle Amendment, we'll talk about later. Disabled adult child beneficiary Medicaid, we'll be covering. That's one of the key groups. And 1619B Medicaid, the Medicaid group for people who work their way off SSI but continue Medicaid. Now, Medicaid may cover a wide variety of services. I've listed them on several slides, starting with slide 6. I won't read them, but when you read through them, you'll see that most of them are things that you would expect health insurance to cover, medical services, but some of them are those key services that people with disabilities need that other insurance might rarely, if ever, cover. Medicaid does entail copays for certain services. We're on to slide 9 now, but they're not much. There is a somewhat significant copay for inpatient hospital stays that may be up to $25. But for every other service, the copays are at most $3, and in many cases, 0. So let's get into the 6 key Medicaid groups we're going to be covering today. There's SSI, that a person is eligible for automatically in the state of New York if they get SSI or the state SSI supplement. 1619B, Medicaid for people who've worked their way off SSI. The Medicaid buy-in program for working people with disabilities, MBI, WPD, my favorite Medicaid eligibility group. This is the one for people with disabilities who are working and meet a few other conditions and don't qualify for one of the other key Medicaid eligibility groups. Next is new adult MAGI. It's no longer new anymore. It's existed since 2014. This is the Medicaid expansion for adults with or without disabilities, with low incomes, that was made possible through the Affordable Care Act. Next is disabled adult child or DAC beneficiaries for people who started out on SSI and then switched to getting a disabled adult child benefit on a parent's work record. And finally, a Medicaid spend down, also known as medically needy Medicaid or excess income or surplus income for people who are age 60 or over, blind or disabled. So I'm going to go through the eligibility for several of these, then pause for questions, and then we'll finish them and go into the case examples. So SSI, you should all be very familiar with this. If a person gets SSI or the state SSI supplement program or both, they're automatically eligible. Their countable income has to be under $1,054 a month for an individual or $1,554 a month for a married couple. Their countable resources or assets have to be under 2,000 for an individual, 3,000 for a married couple. And naturally, the SSI program uses the SSI rules for determining countable income and resources. And I'm going to assume that you're all at least somewhat familiar with those rules. There's no cost, no monthly premium to get Medicaid through SSI or the SSI state supplement program. You don't have to apply. You're automatically eligible if you receive SSI payments, but you may need to contact your local DSS office in order to get your Medicaid card. So a quick example, Latricia starts out with $1,054 a month, SSI, the maximum between the federal benefit and the state benefit for a single unmarried person. She starts a job that pays her $1,085 a month gross wages. Her countable income is $500 a month using the SSI rules. Her SSI is reduced to $554 a month. So should she still be eligible for SSI Medicaid, please go ahead and type an answer into the chat. I want to keep this somewhat engaging. Um, okay, very good. Everyone's saying yes. Absolutely correct. As long as she's getting any amount of SSI, even down to the minimum dollar a month, SSI or SSP, she is automatically eligible for Medicaid through SSI. Then we move on to 1619B, my second favorite Medicaid eligibility group. This is the group for people whose earnings from work have risen high enough to reduce their SSI and SSP benefit down to zero. But it enables people to remain eligible for SSI and SSP despite the fact that their earned income is too high for them to get payments. And remaining eligible for SSI does two things. One, it continues Medicaid eligibility, which is our focus here, but it also enables people to get quickly and easily back on SSI payments if something happens to their earnings later. If the earnings drop or person stops working for any reason, they just have to contact Social Security to get their SSI restarted. But the key point for us today is that a person in 1619B status keeps their Medicaid. To be eligible for 1619B, the person had to have earned income that increased high enough that it reduced their SSI or SSP payment down to zero. They have to have countable unearned income below $1,054 a month for an unmarried individual, below the countable income limit for SSI. They have to have countable resources under the usual SSI limit, 2,000 for an individual, 3,000 for a married couple. In other words, if it weren't for their earned income, they would still be eligible for an SSI payment. That's the rule for 1619B. 1619B is just a form of SSI eligibility, so it uses the SSI rules for countable income and resources. There is an earnings threshold, a threshold of earned income that a person has to meet to qualify for 1619B. The usual threshold in New York is a little over $64,000 a year in 2025. So if a person's earnings are below that, they meet that threshold. What if their earnings are more than $64,017 for the year? Well, in some cases, they may qualify for a higher threshold known as an individualized threshold, particularly if the person has higher than average Medicaid expenses personally, or they get publicly funded attendant care funded through a source other than Medicaid, or if they're using impairment related work expenses, blind work expenses, or PASS, plan to achieve self support expenses, then a higher individualized threshold could be calculated for them. And when I think particularly about people getting those home and community-based services through a Medicaid waiver program, they typically have much higher than average Medicaid costs and may have individualized 1619B thresholds that are way more than $64,000 a year. Person has to need Medicaid to be eligible for 1619B, but the criteria for needing Medicaid are extremely generous. If you used Medicaid within the last year, you meet the criterion. If you expect to use it in the next year, even if you didn't use it in the last year, you meet the criterion. Or even if you don't expect to use it in the coming year, but if you would need it in a medical emergency, couldn't afford the expenses without it, then you need Medicaid by definition here. You can't have medically improved, have to still be medically disabled. And there's no monthly premium, same as for SSI Medicaid, and you don't have to apply for it. So, a quick example, Jamal starts out getting $620 a month of Social Security disability insurance, SSDI, and $454 a month of SSI with the state supplement. He starts a job that pays him $1,465 a month gross wages. His SSI countable income is $1,300 a month if you use the SSI formula. So his SSI, SSP payment is reduced to zero because of those earnings. But his earnings are well below the 64,000 plus per year earnings threshold for 1619B. He uses Medicaid regularly. He has $400 in total resources, and he is not medically improved. So should he be eligible for 1619B? Can please type an answer into the chat. Yes, very good. Everyone's saying yes, that's true. He ticked off all the boxes. If you look at the eligibility criteria for 1619B, he meets all of them. And a little later, when we get into the case studies, you'll probably want to pull up your New York Medicaid cheat sheet so that it'll be easier for you to see which eligibility groups people may qualify for. Okay. Next, Medicaid buy-in program for working people with disabilities, MBI-WPD, my favorite. This is the Medicaid buy-in program for New York. All but several states, I think maybe 46 states now, have Medicaid buy-in programs, but they're all different. And everyone has a generic name, namely a Medicaid buy-in program, and each one also has another name. In New York, it's MBIWPD. Because you see, this is one of the rules for bureaucrats trying to confuse the public. Give some benefits more than one name. That keeps everyone off balance. But within MBIWPD, there are actually two subgroups of eligibility. There's the basic coverage group for people who are still considered disabled by Social Security's rules. And then there's another group called the Medical Improvement Group. And this is for people who enrolled in MBIWPD when they were still considered medically disabled under Social Security's rules. But while they were enrolled in MBIWPD, they had a medical review that determined that they had medically improved. And that would cause them to lose eligibility for benefits like Title II disability and SSI. But this medical improvement group enables them to keep Medicaid through MBIWPD if they meet certain criteria. Now, for the basic coverage group, the criteria to be eligible are you have to be at least 16 years old, but there's no upper age limit, which is very cool. In most states, the Medicaid buy-in program only lasts until a person turns 65. New York does not have that rule, no upper age limit. A person has to meet Social Security's definition of disability for adults, except the SGA part. A person can be capable of doing SGA, can be doing SGA, can be earning much more than SGA and still qualify for MBIWPD, which is very important and logical. Goal of MBIWPD is to encourage paid work. So you don't want to penalize people for working and earning over SGA. Person does need to be working for pay, but there's actually no minimum earnings requirement. They could be earning very little, but but they do have to do some paid work. They could be working seasonally. If they become unemployed through no fault of their own, their job was lost, or they had to stop work for medical reasons. A change in medical condition is the term used in the rules. Uh, then they can continue to receive MBIWPD for up to 6 months in a 12-month period while they're looking for other paid work. And then if they find other paid work within the 6 months, they can continue MBIWPD. So having that 6 month grace period is helpful. Now, a person has to have countable income using the SSI rules under 250% of the federal poverty level, which is currently $3,261 a month for an individual and $4,407 a month for a married couple this year. They have to have countable resources below a limit. That limit is way higher than for most states, over $31,000 for an individual, over $42,000 for a married couple. And as I mentioned, MBIWPD uses the SSI rules for determining countable income. Plus, it deducts health insurance premiums that are paid by the applicant or their spouse. So if the applicant or their spouse is getting employer-sponsored health insurance and they're paying for premiums for that insurance, then those premiums are deducted from countable income for MBIWPD. You also use the SSI rules for countable resources for MBIWPD. Plus, there's an advantage that a second car can be excluded from resources. The SSI rules only exclude one car if that car is used for medical needs or employment. And all retirement accounts are excluded from resources, which is different from the usual SSI rules. Now, the SSI rules are used to determine the types of income and resources that are countable, but note the countable income and resource limits for MBIWPD are much higher than the SSI limits. Okay, I had been asked to clarify that. So you use the SSI rules to determine countable income and countable resources, but you're not using the SSI countable income and resource limits. You're using the MBI WPD countable income and resource limits, which are much higher than the SSI limits. Now, there's currently a moratorium on monthly premiums. It's been going on for quite a while now. But if and when that moratorium is lifted, the regular rules specify that people with countable income of 150% of federal poverty or more for a single person or two people, if it's a married couple, um, would ordinarily have to pay a monthly premium for MBIWPD. Now, for the medical improvement group, a lot of the eligibility criteria are identical as for the basic coverage group, but there are a few differences. One is to be eligible for the medical improvement group, as I mentioned earlier, the person would have had to enroll in the basic coverage group. And then while they were enrolled in the basic coverage group, they had a medical review that showed they had medically improved. Secondly, they have to have at least a certain level of earnings. Remember, for the basic coverage group, they had to have earnings from work, but there's no minimum amount. There is a minimum for the medical improvement group. And that minimum is they have to have earnings, have to work at least 40 hours a month, earning at least the federal minimum wage. Of course, the federal minimum wage is only $7.25 an hour, and the minimum wage in New York, everywhere in New York, is much higher. Um, but all the other criteria for paid work apply, same as the basic coverage group. Um, if the individual is not working at least 40 hours a month, we have someone who's off mute. Please check and make sure your line is
Yeah.
muted.
Oh,
I hear a conversation we've got going on. Okay. So if an individual is not working at least 40 hours a month at the end of their grace period, um, at the end of that 6 month grace period we talked about, due to medical reasons, then they have to have a continuing disability review to see if they could be eligible again for the basic coverage group, right? Their work activity, if they're in the medical improvement group, has to be reviewed every 6 months. And if the person is self-employed, to figure out if they're meeting the minimum earnings requirement, you take their gross pay for the month and divide it by the number of hours they worked to make sure they're earning at least the federal minimum wage in self-employment. Okay, same countable income limit, same countable resource limit, same SSI rules used for countable income and resources, um, with the exclusions of health insurance premiums from countable income, a second car, and all retirement accounts being excluded from resources. Okay. And same moratorium on monthly premiums. Now, people enrolled in MBI WPD who, who have countable income under 150% of federal poverty can choose to enroll in Medicaid through a managed care organization, but it's not mandatory. If people have countable income at or above 150% of federal poverty, they cannot participate in managed care for their medical services, but they could choose to participate in managed care for long-term care services like Medicaid waiver services. That would be an option for them. Um, okay, so let's move on to an example here. Stephanie gets $1,370 a month of SSDI and Medicare. She's 52 years old, not married, has no children. She starts a job that pays her $1,540 a month gross wages. Her countable income, using the SSI rules, is $2,087.50 a month, which is below the MBI-WPD countable income limit for a single person of $3,261 a month. She has $8,000 in her bank account and a 401k plan with $10,000 in it. And remember, retirement accounts are not counted against the resource limit for MBI-WPD. So does she appear eligible for MBI-WPD? If you can please go ahead and type an answer in the chat. Okay. Everyone is saying yes, and it's yes. She's ticked off all the boxes. She is eligible. Very good. All right. I am probably not supposed to show you this next bit of information, but I'm going to anyway. Many of you may know that New York has made a plan to improve the MBI WPD program and to make the rules a bit more generous. Now, that plan has been submitted to the federal government for review and approval. The plan cannot take effect unless and until the federal government approves. The federal government, particularly with the cuts to the Department of Health and Human Services, including the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services that has to review and approve New York's plan, has had a lot of staff cuts. We don't know when or even necessarily if the improvements will be approved. So they are not in the PowerPoint that I gave you. However, I did create a separate PowerPoint in the event that the rule changes are approved by the feds. So I'll provide that to you if the changes are approved. But I want to just highlight to you what those proposed changes are. But let me stress, these are proposed changes. They are not in effect, which is why I did not give you this version of the PowerPoint. One of the things they do is dramatically increase the countable income limit. Rather than 250% of federal poverty, it would go up to 2,250% of federal poverty, which for an unmarried individual is over $350,000 a year. It would dramatically increase the countable resource limit almost by 10 times. That would go up to $300,000. Another advantage is under the improved rules, only the individuals, the applicants' income would be counted and not their spouses. Under the current rules, a spouse's income is counted in determining eligibility. Same would be true of resources. Only the individual with a disability who's applying, only their own resources would count, not their spouses. Okay. And if the monthly premiums are resumed, if the moratorium is lifted, people would have to pay a monthly premium only if their countable income were 250% of federal poverty or greater. Under current rules, it would be if their countable income were 150% of federal poverty or greater. In other words, people with countable income between 150% and 250% of federal poverty would not have to pay premiums under the new and improved rules. And I think that's basically it. There are higher monthly premiums for people with countable incomes greater than 250% of federal poverty, which does seem fair. Um, but those are the proposed changes. They are not yet in place, and it's not certain that they will be approved, but we certainly hope so. They do fall within the allowable range that states are able to put in their Medicaid buy-in programs. So I do hope that they will be approved. Okay, I want to pause for questions now. I'm going to look in the chat, see if there's anything, and please feel free to come off mute if you have any questions or comments.
Michael, this is Maricela Brea speaking.
Hi, Ms.
Um, how are you? Thank you for your presentation so far. So what is the the expected date of them approving this proposal that you just went over?
Yeah, I wish I knew. Nobody
Mhm.
knows. Ordinarily, before all of the staff cuts
Mhm.
uh, and cuts to federal government programs, I would have said that it would probably be sometime this year. Um, but but now I have no idea, and I have asked that question. Do we have any idea what's going to happen to these proposed changes? It's called a Medicaid state plan amendment that has to be submitted to the feds for for approval of the changes. And nobody has any idea. Unfortunately, things are kind of chaotic at the federal government right now. Okay, now Julia asks, what is SSP? That's the state SSI supplement, Julia. So currently, for an unmarried individual, the maximum SSI benefit paid out of federal funds is $967 a month. But then there's a state SSI program supplement of up to $87 a month. So that boosts the maximum benefit that a person can get above the federal amount. Okay. And Christopher asked, that's the $300,000 question. Yeah, exactly. Nobody has any idea when or unfortunately even if this will be approved. And the elephant in the room here regarding Medicaid, as most of you know if you followed the news, is that you know the Republicans in Congress are trying to make dramatic cuts in the portion of the budget that includes Medicaid. In fact, Medicaid is the lion's share of that section of the budget. And they're trying to cut $880 billion dollars from that piece of the budget. So we have no idea what's even going to happen to the future of the Medicaid program yet. Um, the good news is for people who care about Medicaid that there are a number of members of Congress, including at least a dozen Republicans in the House, who have publicly said that they would not support cuts um, that would make drastic cuts to the Medicaid program. So we will see what happens. All right, so that was our third eligibility group, my favorite and the most complicated, but very, very important for working people with disabilities who don't qualify for one of the other eligibility groups. Now we'll move on to groups 4, 5, and 6. Number 4 is still called the New Adult MAGI Medicaid group. So in 2014, this group started. This was the Medicaid expansion that the Affordable Care Act made possible. And it was primarily for adults without dependent children who did not qualify for Medicaid other ways and who had low incomes. So to be eligible for the new adult MAGI group, person has to be 19 to 64 years old, no longer eligible at or after age 65. You cannot be eligible for Medicare. Unfortunate, but it's true for all of the Medicaid eligibility groups that are based on MAGI, modified adjusted gross income. Um, you can't be eligible for mandatory Medicaid groups, other groups like SSI, for example. Can't be pregnant when applying for new adult magi. Now, this sounds like blatant discrimination against pregnant people, but in fact, it's not because pregnant people have another way to get Medicaid that has much more generous rules, much higher income limit than new adult magi Medicaid. So pregnant people are not being excluded here. There is no limit on resources for new adult magi or other Medicaid eligibility groups that use the MAGI rules. Very cool. People could have lots of savings, lots of assets, but very low income and still qualify for this group. And a person does not have to have a disability. The other three groups we've covered so far all require a disability, not this one. Actually, have to require a disability, or for SSI, it could be at least age 65. Um, but no disabilities required. And of course, you have to be under 65 to qualify for new adult MAGI. So this group is really helpful for some people with disabilities, um, particularly I'm thinking of people who are newly eligible for Social Security disability Title II benefits. But as you know, people have to be entitled to those benefits for 2 years before their Medicare starts. So if a person is in the 2 year waiting period for Medicare and they meet the income limit, they could get Medicaid through the new adult MAGI group while they're waiting for their Medicare to start. But they do have to meet the income limit, and the income limit is based on 138% of the federal poverty level for the person's family size. Now, the SSI 1619B and MBI-WPD groups look at the household as being only the individual, or if they're married, the individual and their spouse. But the new adult magi group looks at potentially a larger household. And we'll get to who's included in that household in a moment. So 138% of federal poverty for one person, as slide 28 shows, is $1,800 a month. For two people, it's $2,433 a month, and it goes up from there for each additional person. So the actual income limit depends on the household size. Now, what are the MAGI rules, modified adjusted gross income? You do have a handout that was one of the attachments to the email that you should have received by now that defines MAGI rules in deeper detail. There are things involved like income earned in other countries, things like that that you'll very rarely encounter. But basically, um, MAGI rules mean taxable income, all taxable income, plus any Social Security benefits that are not taxable. All of that added together would give you MAGI, okay? But not SSI. SSI is never taxable, and it is not considered a Social Security benefit. So, for example, if you work with an individual who gets SSDI and they're working part-time, and that's all of their income, well, their part-time work income is taxable. That's going to be counted. And their non-taxable SSDI will also be counted. Add together their wages and their SSDI, and that total would be their income using MAGI rules. So who's in the household? It depends on whether the household is filing a tax return or not. If they do file a tax return, then the household includes the applicant, their spouse, if they're married, and their tax dependents who live with them. It would be all the people on their tax return, and that would be the number of people in the household. If they don't file a tax return, then their household includes the applicant, their spouse, if they're married, and children who live with them who are either 18 or younger or age 20 or younger if they're full-time students and live with them. Okay. There is, once again, no monthly premium for new adult MAGI, and people do need to apply for it. They can do it online or by phone using the information on slide 29. So I think of new adult MAGI as being especially helpful for people who qualify for Social Security disability, but are not yet getting Medicare. Remember, for this group, you cannot remain eligible if you have Medicare. So once your Medicare starts, you're no longer eligible for this group. But there may be another group you could be eligible for. Also, people who may have no income could qualify for this group. Maybe they're just applying for SSI or Title II disability benefits. They have not yet been determined disabled. They're not yet getting those benefits. They could qualify for new adult MAGI while they're waiting. I'm going to tell you a quick personal story. I have a younger brother who got totally sick of his job and quit. And he said, I'm going to take some time off and then I'll look for other work. So he's got no income other than a little bit of interest and dividends on his assets. Um, and he's got lots of assets that he's saved through his life and employment. And he talked to me about the fact that he didn't really want to have to pay the very high premiums to continue his private health insurance through his employer through the COBRA rule. And I asked him, well, how much is your income? And it turns out his income from the interest and dividends on his assets is less than $1,800 a month. And he's single, has no kids. And I said to him, dude, you're eligible for Medicaid. And he said, how can I be when I've got all of these assets? And I said, this new adult MAGI group has no limit on assets, only income. And so my brother, who's sitting on all these assets, has new adult MAGI Medicaid, at least until he gets his next job. And I hope to God that Congress never finds out. Okay, so let's move on to Marisol, who was recently approved for $1,720 a month of SSDI, and she has no other income. She's in the 2-year waiting period to get Medicare, not eligible for Medicare yet. She has no other health insurance. She's single, has no children. And the question is, should she be eligible for adult MAGI Medicaid? And if so, will she still be eligible when her Medicare starts? So if you can type both answers into the chat, uh, yes, 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 no, no, yes, no, no, um, that would be great.
You're in over your head.
We have one dissent so far. Anyone else want to weigh in? Dale asks, what if she is married? Well, if she were married, then there would be a higher income limit, which would be 138% of federal poverty for two people rather than for one. Okay. All right. So we've got some differences of opinion here. First of all, everybody answered yes to the first question. Should she be eligible for adult MAGI Medicaid? Because her countable income under MAGI rules would be $1,720 a month, her SSDI. Remember, MAGI rules are basically taxable income plus non-taxable Social Security benefits. She gets only SSDI. It's not taxable, uh, given that she has no other income. It's $1,720 a month. What was the income limit under MAGI rules for a single person? It was 1,800 a month. She's under that. So she qualifies for the adult MAGI group. But will she still be eligible when her Medicare starts? Most of you said yes. But remember, one of the rules is not Medicare eligible. So extra credit for the few of you who answered no, that she would not continue to be eligible once her Medicare starts. That's correct. Okay. But let me ask you a different question. Suppose Marisol's Medicare starts. She's no longer eligible for the adult MAGI group, and she starts some part-time work.
Mm.
Could she qualify for another of the Medicaid eligibility groups that we've already covered? And if so, which one?
Ah,
Okay, exactly. Also in
yeah.
Maryland, say MBIWPD, which is correct. That's right. So this is your first example of how somebody who loses eligibility for one Medicaid group may qualify for a different one. Okay, we're up to number 5 now. Disabled adult child or DAC beneficiaries. This is the group for people who started out on SSI and then switched to getting a disabled adult child benefit um, on a parent's work record. Be eligible for this group, a person had to start out on SSI, and then they qualified for a disabled adult child benefit. Disabled adult child or DAC is actually the old term for this benefit. Most people still use it. The new term is childhood disability benefit or CDB. I prefer DAC because disabled adult child actually describes eligibility for the benefit better than childhood disability benefit. But a person had to either qualify for enough of the DAC benefit that it stopped their SSI, or they could have started out on a low DAC benefit and had some SSI, but then had their DAC benefit increase, maybe because their parent died or they had another parent with a higher benefit who became eligible, and then the disabled adult child got a higher DAC benefit. Quick reminder about DAC eligibility. To be eligible for a DAC benefit, a person has to be an adult at least 18 years old. Their disability had to start before age 22, and they have to have a parent who is getting Social Security retirement or Social Security disability, SSDI,
Oh,
or the parent must be deceased, but must have worked and paid into the system when they were alive long enough to have something called insured status. Okay. So this is the type of Title II disability that a person gets on their parent's record rather than their own. So who's eligible for the DAC group? People who started out on SSI, switched to getting the DAC benefit that stopped their SSI, or had their DAC benefit increase enough that it stopped their SSI. But if it weren't for that DAC benefit or that DAC increase that stopped their SSI, they would still be getting at least $1 of SSI. Okay. So that's the DAC rule, is that you take an alternative universe approach here and say, well, suppose everything were the same for this person, except they didn't have that DAC benefit or the increase in the DAC benefit that stopped their SSI. If they did not have that DAC, would they still be getting at least $1 of SSI? And if the answer is yes, then they're eligible for the DAC beneficiaries Medicaid group. Now, a person should not have to apply for this group. It's supposed to happen automatically between Social Security and the state Medicaid agency. But sometimes people who are eligible for this group are incorrectly terminated from Medicaid. So when you work with a person who gets a DAC benefit and is not getting SSI, it's always a good idea to do some research and find out if they were receiving SSI before their DAC started. And if they were, would they meet the criteria for the DAC beneficiaries group? All right, so let's do an example here. So Miguel received 1,054 a month SSI, the maximum in New York for a single person. His mother retired this year, and Miguel began receiving $1,440 a month of a DAC benefit. His SSI stopped. He has no other income. We've got three questions here. Let's do them one at a time. Should Miguel continue receiving Medicaid as a DAC beneficiary? In other words, if it weren't for the DAC benefit, would he still be getting SSI? If he would, then he's eligible for the DAC beneficiary group. So is he eligible for the DAC beneficiary group currently? Okay, and people are answering yes, and yes is correct. Next question. Suppose Miguel started working and earning $1,285 a month gross wages. From what you know about the SSI countable income rules, should he still qualify for the DAC Medicaid, DAC beneficiaries Medicaid group with that level of earnings? Okay, those of you who answered said yes, and yes is correct. Because with $1,285 a month of earned income, less than half of that is countable. You take the $1,285, subtract the $65 earned income exclusion, leaving $1,220. Divide that in half, that leaves $610 a month. And if he didn't have the DAC benefit and had only 600 and I'm sorry, actually, if he didn't have the DAC benefit, his countable income would be 600 a month. You'd be subtracting from the 1285 the $20 general exclusion and the $65 earned income exclusion, leaving 1200. Divide that by 2, you get 600 countable income. With $600 of countable income, he'd still qualify for $454 a month of SSI with the state supplement. That means he would still get SSI. If not for the DAC benefit, he would still be eligible for the DAC group. Last question. What if he earned $3,285 a month gross wages? Would he be eligible for the DAC group then? And we'll assume that when he was earning that much, 3285 a month, he was in his trial work period and still continued to get his DAC benefit. So with that level of earnings, would he still qualify for an SSI payment if not for the DAC benefit? If the answer is yes, then he's still eligible for the DAC group. If the answer is no, then he's not eligible. So should he be eligible for the DAC group with 3285 a month gross wages? Okay. And people are saying no, and no is correct. With 3285 gross wages, countable income would be $1,600 a month. And that's way over the 1,054 a month countable income limit. So without the DAC, he wouldn't get any SSI payment, and that means he's not eligible for the DAC group any longer. All right. And then finally, number 6. This is commonly referred to as the spend down group. It's also known as the excess income or surplus income group. Sometimes it's referred to as the medically needy group. And this is specifically the spend down for people who are blind, disabled, or at least 65 years old. This is the group for people who don't qualify for any of the other five groups, whose income is too high to get Medicaid ordinarily, but who use a process called a spend down to become income eligible for Medicaid. So to qualify for this specific group, person has to either meet Social Security's definition of disability or be at least age 65. And there's no actual income limit, but because their income is over an amount called the medically needy income level or Medicaid standard, it's also called, what they have to do is spend down to that level. What does spending down mean? It means the person is either paying for or is responsible for, although they haven't yet paid for them, medical expenses that equal the difference between their countable income and the medically needy income level. So it's kind of like paying a deductible for insurance. Um, so, well, we'll go into an example in a moment. So to meet the spend down, the first thing to do is to figure out what the person's countable income is. If their countable income is more than the medically needy income level or Medicaid standard, I'll be showing you what that is in a moment, then you consider the difference. Let's say the difference between their countable income and the medically needy income level is $200 a month. That means the person has to pay for or be responsible for $200 a month in medical expenses to meet their spend down. What Medicaid does is they subtract those expenses the person is responsible for or has paid for from their countable income. That brings their countable income down to the medically needy income level, and then they can get Medicaid. In addition to meeting the spend down by the individual paying for or incurring medical expenses that they're responsible for, they also allow them to spend down with medical bills that are paid by a public program of the state, like EPIC or ADAP, or by a county. Those can be used to meet the spend down as well. Not expenses covered by Medicaid, but expenses covered by certain other public programs. So if a person has one of those programs paying for certain medical expenses, the expenses paid by that program can also be used to spend down. That would be the exception when the individual wouldn't have to pay for or incur the expenses personally. So what's the medically needy income level or Medicaid standard? For one person, it's $1,800 a month. For a married couple, it's $2,433 a month. By the way, these medically needy income levels are much more generous than in most other states. Now, if a person can either meet their spend down on a monthly basis or for a period of 6 months. To meet it on a monthly basis, you just figure out what's their countable income for this month, what's their medically needy income level. They spend or incur medical expenses equal to the difference. They've met their spend down for a month. But let's say they want to meet the spend down for a 6 month period. Well, let's say that their spend down amount for 1 month would be $200 a month. For a 6 month period, it would be 200 a month times six is 1,200 a month. To meet the spend down for a 6 month period, they would have to spend or incur $1,200 of medical expenses that they're responsible for. And then they would qualify for Medicaid for the remainder of a 6 month period. So if a person meets their spend down only on a monthly basis, they qualify for Medicaid coverage of only outpatient services. If they meet their spend down for a 6 month period, then they qualify for both inpatient and outpatient coverage. To qualify for spend down Medicaid, a person has to meet the countable resource limit. It's the same countable resource limit that applied to MBI WPD, over 31,000 for a single person, over 42,000 for a married couple. And again, the spend down uses the SSI rules for countable income and excludes health insurance premiums that are paid by the applicant or their spouse. That was the same as the MBI WPD rules. And it uses the SSI rules for countable resources, plus excludes a second car if it's used for medical needs or employment. That's similar to the MBI WPD countable resource rules, except MBI WPD also excluded retirement accounts from resources. Spend down does not. And the household for the spend down group generally includes just the applicant, or if they're married, the applicant and their spouse. And you do have to apply for this group at the local DSS office. Okay. Adele asks, can someone define EPIC and ADAP? Honestly, I didn't look up these programs. Um, so I would have to look them up as well. But it's safe to say from the rules here that these are programs operated by the state with state funding. They're not Medicaid programs that do pay for certain medical expenses for eligible people. Okay. So let's do an example here. And this is George, who gets $2,080 a month of SSDI and Medicare. He's not married. He urgently needs medical services that Medicare does not cover, but Medicaid does. The services cost $1,200 a month. And the first question is, if George incurs enough of these healthcare expenses that he's responsible for paying, should he qualify for a spend down? And you can go ahead and type an answer into the chat for that. I haven't yet asked how much his spend down would be, just simply if he pays enough for medical expenses or incurs enough for medical expenses, will he qualify for um, a spend down? And Marilyn, thank you very much. That EPIC is Elderly Pharmaceutical Insurance Coverage Program, and ADAP is AIDS Drug Assistance Program. Thank you very much. Okay, and the answers we're getting are yes, and that's true. If he pays enough for medical expenses or incurs enough in medical expenses, he'll qualify for a spend down. Next question, how much should his spend down amount be? All right, so remember, we're taking his countable income using the SSI rules. His only income is $2,080 a month. Remember the general exclusion of $20 a month. And his personal Medicaid or medically needy income level, since he's single, is
1,800.
$1,800 a month. So you want to take his countable income, remember, subtract the $20, and then subtract from that the $1,800 medically needy income level. And that difference that you get will tell you his spend down amount. And when you have that, please go ahead and type it into the chat. Okay, thank you, Maricela. Does anyone else care to weigh in on this? Okay, I'm assuming this means people are confused. So let's go through this one step by step. So the spend down rules say first, you calculate countable income using the SSI rules. George's only income is SSDI of $2,080 a month. That is unearned income. Under the SSI rules, for unearned income, you subtract the $20 general income exclusion, and what's left is the countable unearned income. So 2,080 minus 20 is 2,060. Next step is subtract George's medically needy income level, which for an unmarried individual, remember, was $1,800 a month. So we've got 2,060 countable income minus 1,800 medically needy income level. And the spend down amount ends up being $260 a month. And that's correct. And if George met his spend down for just 1 month, he could get outpatient services covered by Medicaid. If he meets his spend down for a 6 month period, which means he would need to spend or incur 260 times six, 260 a month times 6 months, which would be $1,560 in medical expenses. If he incurs that much, then he'll get a spend down for a 6 month period. His Medicaid would start after he had incurred $1,560, and he'd get it for the remainder of the 6 month period. And the 6 month spend down would qualify him for both inpatient and outpatient services covered by Medicaid. So, final question. If George started paid work, would he have a better option to get Medicaid, better than the spend down? And if so, what would it be? Okay, got two answers. Anyone else? Yeah, MBIWPD is his. First of all, there's no monthly premium currently. There's still a moratorium on premiums. So he'd get MBIWPD for free. And even when the premiums are resumed, his monthly premium at his level of income would be less than his spend down. So MBIWPD can be a great alternative to a spend down, but people need to be working. So if you end up working with someone who's in a spend down to get their Medicaid, but it appears that they would be eligible for MBIWPD if they were working, they meet all the other eligibility criteria, you have a golden opportunity to provide them with an additional incentive to work. Namely, if they work, even if they're earning just a little, remember there's no minimum amount you need to earn to get into the basic coverage group for MBIWPD, then they could qualify for Medicaid through MBIWPD and not have to spend all that money on medical expenses to get a spend down. Okay. Any questions or comments? We've finally wrapped up uh, a review of our 6 key eligibility groups. Austin asks, is there any eligibility for parents of a child with a disability? I'm thinking of parents with a child that would need Medicaid covered services, but the parents may not normally qualify for Medicaid. It's a good question, Austin. In fact, yes, there are Medicaid eligibility groups for parents of dependent children, actually, whether or not the children are disabled. Um, I did want to limit the number of eligibility groups that we would be covering in this training because it's already intense enough. So I have not included those groups, but there are groups for parents and other caregiver relatives, they're called. Um, and that would be among the other dozens of Medicaid eligibility groups to choose from. But we're not going to cover that one today. Good
Hi,
question.
hi, hi. I accessed this training through a NYESS email with several other trainings and links, and I and some of my staff, we were not provided with handouts or PowerPoints. How do we get them?
Okay. If you could please type your email address into the chat, and I wanted to impose on any of you who would be willing to forward the email that you received last night that has the 7 attachments to anyone who types their email into the chat. That would be
Hi,
great.
hi, Michael. This is Jennifer Semonite. I'll be glad to do
Oh,
that.
thank you, Jennifer. I really appreciate it. Um, and let's see how we're doing on time. Okay, I think what we should do is take a brief break here. Why don't we take a 10-minute break? Um, and that's because you probably need a break, and also so everyone will have access to that email with the attachments. You're going to need the attachments when we go through these case studies next, right after the break. Okay, so it appears that it's now about 11:18, about 11:28, we'll start back up again. So enjoy your break. I'm sorry I did it again. I was muted once again. So sorry. So, what I was saying to myself was that we're now going to go through the most important part of the training, which is the case studies, in which you'll be presented with several people. Each one will start out eligible for one Medicaid eligibility group, but then their circumstances will change. And your task is to figure out, can they still be eligible for that group? And if not, is there another Medicaid eligibility group they can qualify for? Um, in order to do that, you want to use the New York Medicaid cheat sheet that's on the screen right now. I'm assuming by now everyone has received the email, and Jennifer, thanks so much for forwarding that to people who hadn't received it. And that email does include this cheat sheet. So if you don't already have it open, please go ahead and open it. You will need it for these exercises. The Medicaid eligibility cheat sheet lists each of the 6 Medicaid eligibility groups we just went through. It provides a brief description, the non-financial eligibility criteria that have to be met, countable income limits, which set of rules are used for income and resource counting, SSI or MAGI, the countable resource limits, if there are resource limits, monthly premium, it's going to be none for any of them currently. Although there's the cost to the spend down, person has to spend or incur medical expenses, and whether there's an application needed. So as we go through these scenarios, you're going to use this sheet to figure out which eligibility group does the person start out in, and each time their situation changes, ask yourself 2 questions. One, are they still eligible for the same group? If so, that's great. And if not, are they eligible for a different group, and which one? So using this cheat sheet is a lot easier than sifting through all the PowerPoint slides, I think. And this is what you'll be using for this exercise. So the name of the game is make sure people get to keep their Medicaid because it's so essential. And we are back to the PowerPoint. And we're going to start with Portia. So Portia is 23 years old, was diagnosed with a disability last month. She's had a few jobs in the last 5 years, but had to stop working 3 months ago due to her disability. She applied for SSDI last month, but naturally has not received a decision yet. Her disability determination is pending. So while she waits for SSDI, she has no income, but she has $17,000 in her bank account. She's not married. She has no children. She lives with roommates. She's not pregnant. She needs Medicaid as soon as possible to get treatment and support services related to her disability. So, which Medicaid group would be best for Portia right now? You don't have to answer why, but if you can type an answer into the chat, there is one group that is particularly helpful for her. And I'll give you a little clue. It would be helpful for her even if she had $100,000 in her bank account. And you can find it on your cheat sheet. Okay. So, because this part of the training is so important, and I really want you to engage with it, I am definitely looking for more people to answer than did earlier. We've got 5 people so far answering. It's not a test, but it is important that uh, we get some engagement here. So please go ahead and no need to explain why, but just provide the Medicaid eligibility group that Portia should qualify for that would be best for her now. Okay, I'm gonna give you 10 more seconds and definitely looking for some more people to participate. Thank you very much. Very good. I appreciate you weighing in. Everyone agreed it was MAGI, the new adult MAGI group, and that is correct. Certainly meets the income limit. She has no income. Remember, there's no resource limit for new adult MAGI Medicaid, so it doesn't matter how much is in her bank account. She does not have to have a disability to qualify for this group. So, because she has not yet been determined disabled by Social Security, they're reviewing her SSDI application, she can't yet qualify for one of the groups that requires a disability. But she can qualify for the new adult MAGI group. She met all the criteria. Very good. So, not yet eligible for Medicare is another criterion and not pregnant. So, 17 months later, Portia is approved for SSDI in the amount of $1,350 a month. She gets a lump sum of over $16,000 of SSDI back pay, retroactive to 12 months earlier. She'll now be entitled to Medicare in 12 months. She's now gone through 1 year of her 2 year waiting period for Medicare. She spent all but $1,000 of the money in her bank account paying for living expenses while waiting for her SSDI to be approved. She opened an ABLE account and she deposited all of the SSDI back pay into it because she wants to hold on to that and save it. Now, the back pay from SSDI would not be counted as a resource for Medicaid for 9 months under Social Security rules, but Portia figures she'll put it in an ABLE account. She can save it indefinitely. So the changes then are she now has income of $1,350 a month SSDI, still not eligible for Medicare, has only $1,000 in her regular bank account, and the rest of the money is now in an ABLE account, which is excluded from resources for Medicaid purposes. So which Medicaid group would be best for her now? Ask yourself 2 questions. One, is she still eligible for the new adult MAGI group, the group she's in now? If so, then she can stay in it. If not, then you want to think of a different group that she may be eligible for. Okay, so remember her income is now $1,350 a month. We don't want to conflate that with her resources. She's got 1,350 a month SSDI. That's her only income. And her countable resources are $1,000 that's in her bank account. The other money that she got, which might otherwise be a resource, the back pay from SSDI, is in an ABLE account, so it does not count against any resource limit for Medicaid. Okay, and remember that she has gone through 1 year of the 2 year waiting period for Medicare. She's still 1 year away from being eligible for Medicare. Okay, very good. And I think the consensus was she's still eligible for the new adult MAGI group. And I agree with that. Um, she's between 19 and 64 years old. She's not yet eligible for Medicare. She's got 1 more year to wait before Medicare starts. She's not eligible for any other mandatory Medicaid group, like SSI. She's not pregnant. Her income of $1,350 a month, using MAGI rules, which count all taxable income plus non-taxable Social Security benefits. So that would be 1350. Her SSDI amount would be her MAGI income. That's less than the MAGI income limit for a single person of 1800 a month. She's under the income limit, and there's no resource limit for adult MAGI Medicaid. Um, so even if her resources were $100,000, she would still be eligible for adult MAGI Medicaid. Okay. All right. Very good. Before we go further, I did want to tell you in these case studies, there is at least one scenario for every one of the 6 Medicaid eligibility groups we've covered. So every one of the 6 groups will be the correct answer for at least one scenario in all of the case studies we're going through now. And a number of them will appear multiple times, will be the correct answer for a number of scenarios. And I'm going to tip you off that there is one scenario and only one in which the individual is not eligible for any of the 6 groups, but only one. Okay, so now Portia has SSDI and she finds a job. She works 15 hours a week, earns $16.50 an hour. Her average gross wages are $1,072 a month. She still gets $1,350 a month SSDI, and her situation is otherwise the same resources, ABLE account, etc. So which Medicaid group is she eligible for now? And remember to ask yourself first, is she still eligible for new adult MAGI? If she is, there's your answer. If she's not, is there a different Medicaid eligibility group she would qualify for? Okay, Evelyn, good question. Is she receiving Medicare yet? And the answer is no. She's not receiving Medicare yet. She's still in the waiting period for Medicare. Great. Let's give it another 10 seconds. Please go ahead and weigh in if you haven't already. Okay, most people answered MBI-WPD, which means you determined that she was no longer eligible for new adult MAGI, but was eligible for MBI-WPD. And I agree with you. So she's not eligible for new adult MAGI Medicaid any longer because her MAGI income using MAGI rules, is the 1350 SSDI plus the 1072 wages equals $2,422 a month. And the new adult MAGI income limit for a single person like Portia is only 1,800 a month. So she's now over the income limit for new adult MAGI. But she is eligible for MBI-WPD. She's the right age, she's over 16. She meets Social Security's disability definition. That's why she's getting SSDI. She's working for pay. She has total countable resources way below the 31,000 plus limit. She has total countable income if you use the SSI or MBIWPD rules of 1833.50 a month, and the countable income limit for a single person with MBIWPD is 3261 a month. Incidentally, for some of these exercises, this would have been one of them. You will also, in addition to using the cheat sheet, may need to use either the SSI countable income sheet, which is an Excel sheet, spreadsheet, or the MBIWPD countable income sheet, specifically for MBIWPD. And for MAGI, remember, it's just taxable income plus Social Security benefits. Okay, so let's just to show you how to use the countable income sheets for Portia, if we're considering MBIWPD, go back and we see that her earned income is 1,072 a month. Her unearned income, SSDI, is 1,350 a month. And now I'm going to open the MBIWPD income, premium, and resource calculator. I'm going to enlarge it a bit so you can see what I'm doing. All of the data entry for this sheet that you'll do will be in column B where the dollar signs are. And it's going to be real simple. We're just going to look at her unearned income for applicant. There's also a line for unearned income for a spouse, but she's not married. So only her own unearned income. And that was $1,350 a month for her SSDI. And then we go down to earned income for applicant, which was, I believe, 1,072 a month. And then going down to the total countable income on line 29, It's $1,833.50. So you can use this to figure out countable income without having to do it with pen and paper or a calculator. This sheet also lets you list countable resources. It will add them up for you to see if they are under the countable resource limit, which is listed at the bottom on line 44. Okay. And then for eligibility groups you may be considering that use the SSI rules, you have the SSI Individual Calculation, which looks pretty similar to the MBIWPD calculator, but it's a little shorter. Okay. Good. And let's get back to Portia now. So sure enough, $1,833.50 a month countable income for WPD, below the 3,261 a month limit. She meets the income limit. She is eligible for MBIWPD. Great. So now let's move on to our next person. And this is Clarence. Clarence is 21 years old. He's not married, has no children, lives alone, pays for his own food and shelter costs. He receives $1,054 a month SSI with the state supplement, the maximum for a single person, has $30 in his bank account, not a student now, but recently graduated from college, sees a psychiatrist and a therapist, takes medication. Which Medicaid group is he eligible for now? There's only one detail, one bullet point on this slide that you need to know that will tell you which Medicaid eligibility group Clarence should be in now. Okay. I think everybody should be able to answer this one easily enough. So I'm going to be looking for some more answers in the chat. We've got universal agreement so far. Okay, give it 10 more seconds. All right. Everyone agreed it's SSI. Absolutely. Okay. But now Clarence's situation changes. He finds a full-time job working 40 hours a week, earning $30 an hour, which averages out to $5,200 a month or $62,400 a year in gross wages. Incidentally, when you're calculating the amount of earnings a person has in a month, you can take their weekly earnings, if their earnings are consistent week to week, you can take their weekly earnings and multiply that by 4 1/3 weeks in a month. We typically think of a month having 4 weeks, but in fact, an average month has 4 1/3 weeks. Clarence opens an Able account to save some of his earnings, still has about $30 in his regular bank account. So which Medicaid group is he eligible for now? So your question is he still eligible for SSI payments and the SSI Medicaid group? If so, that's your answer. If not, then is he eligible for a different Medicaid group? And use your cheat sheet. That will help you. Okay, another 10 seconds. Please go ahead and weigh in. Very good. Almost everybody answered 1619B. That would be my answer as well. With that much in wages, his income would be way too high to get SSI payments. However, his SSI payments would have stopped due to earnings. That's the first criterion for 1619B. His countable unearned income has to be under 1,054 a month. He has no unearned income. He has only earned income. His countable resources are only $30, well under the $2,000 limit. His earnings of $62,400 a year are below New York's 1619B threshold, which is over $64,000 a year. He needs Medicaid. We said that he needs it for psychiatrist, therapist, and medications. So he meets all the eligibility criteria for 1619B. I think one person may have said MBIWPD. And if you look at all the criteria for MBIWPD, you would realize, yes, he could qualify for MBIWPD also. He meets all of those criteria. Here's why 1619B would be better for him. For one thing, 1619B never has a monthly premium. MBIWPD will presumably eventually have monthly premiums again. We're in a moratorium now, but eventually someone with Clarence's level of income, when the premiums resume, will have a monthly premium. The other advantage to 1619B is that it is a form of SSI eligibility. It provides Medicaid, but it also would enable Clarence to go right back on SSI payments without having to reapply if anything happened to his job, which would be a nice bonus for someone who's new to employment. And, it's possible it may not work out. If he loses the job, he just contacts Social Security, gets his SSI payments restarted. So MBIWPD would not be incorrect. That would be a correct answer for Clarence, but the best answer would be 1619B. All right, Clarence's situation changes again. He continues his full-time job for 2 years. He's then hospitalized briefly. He stops working for 8 months. He's earned 8 Social Security work credits. He's 24 years old. A 24-year-old with 8 Social Security work credits qualifies for SSDI. And when he gets out of the hospital, Social Security evaluates his eligibility for SSDI. He started out on SSI and 1619B. SSI is considered a benefit of last resort. To be eligible for it, you have to agree to apply for and accept any other benefit you may be entitled to, especially Social Security disability. So Social Security figures out, oh, he's eligible for SSDI, and his benefit amount is $2,234 a month. So no more SSI for Clarence. Now he's getting $2,234 a month of SSDI. And we're going to assume that while he was in the hospital, Medicaid covered the full cost of his services, and he does not have any significant medical services that we're aware of now that he's out of the hospital. So which Medicaid group is he eligible for now? Previously, you said 1619B. So you want to ask yourself, is he still eligible for 1619B? And if not, is there another Medicaid group he's eligible for? So you definitely need your cheat sheet for this. Okay, we have lots of different answers here. You know that they're not all right, so you have nothing to lose weighing in and guessing wrong. You're not alone. Okay, give it another 10 seconds. Just take a crack at it. This one is difficult. Okay. So, so let's consider, very good. Thank you all for weighing in here. So let's consider each of the six eligibility groups. First of all, he was in 1619B before he was hospitalized and then qualified for SSDI. 1619B, among other criteria, says countable unearned income must be under $1,054 a month. How much is Clarence's unearned income? $2,234 a month, his SSDI. And the countable amount of that, using the SSI rules, subtracting the $20 general income exclusion, would be $2,214 a month. That's way over 1,054. And that tells you he's no longer eligible for 1619B. Also, with that much countable income, he won't be eligible for SSI payments. Countable income limit, total countable income limit for SSI for a single person is 1,054. He's way over that. So we've knocked out SSI and 1619B. Third on the list, MBIWPD. Does he qualify for that? Well, he's not working. You have to be working for pay to get MBIWPD. At the moment, he's not working. So that rules out MBIWPD. Next on the list, new adult MAGI. The MAGI income limit for new adult MAGI for a single person, $1,800. Clarence's MAGI, his SSDI amount, 2234. Too much income for a new adult MAGI. What about number 5, DAC? Well, he's not getting DAC. He's getting SSDI based on his own work record. He's not getting a disabled adult child benefit on a parent's record. That rules out DAC. Finally, spend down. Spend down is a possibility for Clarence, or it would be, if he had medical expenses that he could pay for or incur to meet the spend down. But from what we've got here, we're not aware of medical expenses that would qualify him for a spend down. So if you answered spend down, I would say, yeah, he could definitely be eligible for a spend down, but we would need more information to know that he had enough medical expenses that he was responsible for to meet his spend down. And we don't have that information. So this is the one that I was referring to when I said there was one scenario where the correct answer was the person was not eligible for any of the 6 Medicaid eligibility groups. And the next slide basically summarizes all the reasons. But now we move on, and Clarence's situation changes once again. He needs to be hospitalized again 2 months later. He's not eligible for Medicaid at that point. We already determined. He has not completed the 2-year waiting period for Medicare. He's currently uninsured, no health insurance. He's in the hospital without health insurance. He stays in for a week. He gets a hospital bill for $30,000. So which Medicaid group is he eligible for now? So you already know he's eligible for something because I had told you there's only one scenario where the person was not eligible for Medicaid at all. And the question is, which Medicaid group could he be eligible for now? Okay, we've got a lot of agreement on this one. Please go ahead, type something in. If you're not sure, you can say what everybody else said. You'll either be right or you'll be in good company if you're wrong. Okay, so I think everyone's agreed spend down, and spend down is correct. He meets Social Security's definition of disability. So spend down for aged, blind, and disabled has that requirement. Countable resources are only $30, way below the 31,000 plus countable resource limit. He's got plenty of incurred medical costs, $30,000 hospital bill. And most likely, while he was in the hospital, a social worker in the hospital or someone else helped him apply for Medicaid through a spend down anyway. How much is his spend down amount? It's going to be $414 a month. His income is $2,234 of SSDI. His countable income for the spend down using the SSI rules is $2,214 a month. You subtract from the unearned income just the $20 general exclusion. And then you subtract the $1,800 a month medically needy income level. And what's left is $414 a month. Now he wants his spend down to cover inpatient services as well as outpatient. And that means if you go back and look at the details about the spend down, he needs to go through a 6-month spend down. So he's going to need to come up with $414 a month times 6 months, which would be, let's see, 2,484 would be his 6 month spend down. 414 a month times 6 months. He'll be responsible for that portion of his hospital bill, 24,000 or $2,484. But all the rest will be covered by Medicaid. His Medicaid will cover all but his portion, 2,484, of his hospital bill. So the vast majority of his hospital bills will be covered by Medicaid. And he'll have Medicaid for the remainder of the 6 month period through the spend down. But it costs him 414 a month, or 2,484 for 6 months. So after leaving the hospital, Clarence feels well enough to work part-time in an undemanding job. An employment service provider helps him find a part-time job, working 20 hours a week at $16.50 an hour, making $1,430 a month gross wages. Still gets $2,234 a month SSDI, and his situation is otherwise the same, $30 in countable resources, etc. So which Medicaid group is he eligible for now? Does he still need a spend down, or is there another way? Okay, 10 more seconds. Great. Got pretty much consensus on MBIWPD. This is why I love MBIWPD so much, because this is often the fallback option when somebody with a disability is working for pay and they don't qualify for Medicaid any of the other ways. And now that there's no monthly premium, that the moratorium is still in place, it's even free. You don't have to pay a premium for it. Even if he had to pay a premium for MBIWPD, you can bet that Clarence's premium would be much less than his spend down amount. So he meets all the eligibility criteria for MBIWPD. All right, we're going to move on to Martina now, who's 47 years old, not married, no kids, lives alone, pays her own food and shelter costs, gets the maximum 1,054 a month SSI with the state supplement, $100 in her checking account, no other resources. Which Medicaid group does she get now? This is a gift. Everybody should be able to answer this one quickly and easily. Yes, she is eligible for SSI because she receives an SSI payment. So she gets SSI Medicaid. Now, Martina's mother retires, starts getting a Social Security retirement benefit of $28.60 a month. Martina now qualifies for a disabled adult child or childhood disability benefit, disabled adult child benefit of $1,430 a month, half the amount of her mother's retirement benefit. So her countable income from the CDB or DAC benefit is $1,410 a month, the unearned income minus the $20, which is higher than the $1,054 a month countable income limit for SSI. So her SSI stops. Still has $100 in her checking account, no other resources. So which Medicaid group is she eligible for now? Is it SSI? And if not, which other group would she qualify for? Okay, great. 10 more seconds. Okay, so most people said DAC. That is the correct answer because she's no longer eligible for SSI. Her DAC benefit is too high. But she is eligible for DAC because she started out on SSI. She lost the SSI due to receiving the DAC benefit. And if it weren't for the DAC benefit, she would still qualify for SSI payments. She would have no income if she didn't have the DAC benefit. And she has only $100 of countable resources. So she qualifies for DAC. I think at least one person answered new adult MAGI, which is an interesting guess, and it's really close to being correct. But there was one detail that I went through perhaps too quickly about new adult MAGI that would not qualify, that Martina would not qualify for, which is you can't be eligible for another mandatory Medicaid eligibility group. And I didn't really explain this, but DAC beneficiaries is a mandatory Medicaid eligibility group. So because she's eligible for DAC, that would rule out adult MAGI. But I did not explain that before. And I apologize for that. All right, next, Martina gets connected with a local workforce agency, helps her find a part-time job. She is earning an average of $1,430 a month gross wages. She's in her trial work period. Her $1,430 a month DAC benefit continues. She still has $100 of countable resources. Her living situation is the same. So which Medicaid group is she eligible for now? The previous answer was DAC beneficiaries. First question is she still eligible for the DAC beneficiaries group? If not, is she eligible for another group? Okay, we've got differing answers, differing opinions about this one. Okay, take another 10 seconds. Okay, this one's tricky. This one is tricky. So the correct answer is still DAC beneficiaries. The most popular answer was MBIWPD, which is my favorite Medicaid eligibility group, but that doesn't mean I'm going to always make that the right answer. Um, so why is she eligible for still eligible for DAC beneficiaries? Because her countable income, not counting the DAC benefit, using the SSI rules, would be $672.50 a month. Okay, so the rule with the DAC beneficiaries group is if you didn't have the DAC benefit, would you still get an SSI payment? If Martina did not have the DAC benefit, her other income would be just her earnings from work, $1,430 a month. If you plug $1,430 a month earned income into your SSI spreadsheet, it will tell you that her countable income is 672.50. That's less than the 1,054 a month countable income limit for SSI, which means she would be eligible for an SSI payment if not for that DAC benefit. And she has only $100 in countable resources, so she's still eligible for DAC. MBIWPD, would she be eligible for it? She would, but eventually that's going to have a premium, presumably. And DAC beneficiaries never has a premium. So DAC beneficiaries would be actually the better option for her. Now, Martina's boss offers her an increase in work hours to 40 a week at the same hourly wage. That bumps up her average gross wages to $2,860 a month. She's still in her trial work period, so she's still keeping her DAC benefit. She's saved $900 in her checking account. Living situation is still the same. So which Medicaid group is she eligible for now? So we want to ask yourself, is she still eligible for DAC with the level of income she has now? Specifically the level of earnings. If so, that's your answer. If not, then which other eligibility group could she qualify for? Okay, another 10 seconds. Great. The overwhelmingly popular answer was MBIWPD, and that is correct. Why is she no longer eligible for DAC beneficiaries? Because if you take her $2,860 a month wages, plug that into the SSI formula, her countable income is $1,387.50. That's more than the 1,054 countable income limit for SSI. So even if she didn't have the DAC benefit, her earnings would be too high. Her countable income from earnings would be too high for her to get any SSI payment. And that means she's not eligible for the DAC group. But she meets all the criteria for MBIWPD. Okay. Next, after her trial work period and grace period end, Martina's DAC benefit stops because she's performing SGA. She's earning $2,860 a month and doesn't have enough ERWIs and subsidy to reduce her countable income below SGA. But she's still getting the gross wages of $2,860 a month. Nothing else has changed in her situation. So the only change is she's not getting the DAC any longer. So which Medicaid group is she eligible for now? Is she still eligible for MBIWPD? If so, that's your answer. If not, is there another group she would qualify for? I want to make sure we have enough time for our next PowerPoint, which won't take very long at all. So just give it another 10 seconds now. Okay, and looks like everybody's agreeing MBIWPD, and that's correct. She's still eligible. The only thing that's changed is her countable income has gone down because she has lost the DAC benefit. And she met all the other criteria. Her countable income is even lower now. She's definitely still eligible for MBIWPD. So that ends the most important part of today's training. I wanted to mention just a few other things about Medicaid. Then we're going to talk about some other medical benefits just briefly. We're not doing case studies for these or anything, but just want you to be aware of them. Now, I still include this in Medicaid training because I find that sometimes states have allowed some people to fall through cracks. And even though this should be a history lesson, for some people, it's still relevant. What am I talking about? During the pandemic, there were a number of federal laws that were passed to address the pandemic emergency. One of the earliest ones is called the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. It basically bribed states to follow certain rules regarding Medicaid. The bribe was the federal government said through this law, we'll give you states more federal money for your Medicaid program if you follow certain rules. Every state said, sure, we'll do it. One of the rules was anybody who was enrolled in Medicaid, even for a single day during the federally declared public health emergency for the pandemic, anybody who was on Medicaid, even for a single day, had to be kept on Medicaid, even if they lost eligibility for the Medicaid group they were enrolled in. They had to be kept on Medicaid until the end of the public health emergency. And after the end of the public health emergency, they had to get a redetermination to see if they were eligible for Medicaid. Only if they had that redetermination after the end of the public health emergency and it determined that they were not eligible for Medicaid at all, only then could their Medicaid stop. The only other circumstances when their Medicaid could stop would be if the person said they didn't want Medicaid anymore, or they moved out of state, or they died. So the public health emergency ended May 11th, 2023. And then states had a 14-month period to do all of these redeterminations, which was a huge task. You had potentially millions of people, certainly many millions of people throughout the country who had not had Medicaid eligibility determinations for years because of this protection. Tons of them had to get redeterminations. And New York was due to complete the Medicaid redeterminations by May 31st of 2024. And a lot of people kept Medicaid. A lot of people lost Medicaid incorrectly. Many of them have been able to get back into Medicaid. Some of them may not have, may be eligible for Medicaid, but not getting it now. So when you work with people who are not getting Medicaid, be sure you check and see if maybe they should be eligible, because there are probably still some people who should be on Medicaid who are not getting it because of a glitch during this post-pandemic series of Medicaid eligibility redeterminations. People who were not eligible for Medicaid at all, really weren't, were referred to the marketplace to be able to get private health insurance called qualified health plans through the Affordable Care Act, often with heavy subsidies to make the costs much less for them. Okay. Now, New York had some protections in place that were really helpful, that provided some additional benefits for people, particularly during the redetermination process. One of them was that during the redeterminations through May of 2024, they didn't apply resource limits. Even if their Medicaid eligibility group ordinarily had a resource limit, like most of the ones we've covered, they didn't consider resources. If people did not reply when they got redetermination packets in the mail, but they were enrolled in SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or food stamps, they would have Medicaid automatically renewed for a year, which is very cool because a lot of people lost their Medicaid simply because they didn't return their Medicaid redetermination packets. This was a protection for some of those, at least the ones who got SNAP. Now, people whose only income was benefits from Social Security would have their eligibility redeterminations for Medicaid without having to complete a redetermination packet. Medicaid did it without that paperwork. And people who got MAGI Medicaid but became entitled to Medicare during the public health emergency, even though they were no longer eligible for MAGI Medicaid. Remember, if you get Medicare, you're not eligible for MAGI Medicaid. They let them keep MAGI Medicaid, even though they were getting Medicare, if they met the other eligibility requirements, with some exceptions. So just wanted you to be aware of that. The conclusion here is that we know many, many people we work with, probably majority, maybe vast majority, depend on Medicaid because of everything it covers. Incidentally, if you're thinking about what about Medicaid waiver programs, like the Medicaid waiver program that provides home and community-based services for people with developmental disabilities in the state of New York. You have to have Medicaid to qualify for that waiver program. Well, guess what? All six of the eligibility groups that we covered are compatible with the developmental disabilities Medicaid waiver program. So a person could have any of those six Medicaid eligibility groups and meet the Medicaid requirement for that waiver program, which is very cool. So people's lives are not static, especially if employment services are doing their job, helping people go to work, increase their earnings, therefore have more money to save, etc. Stuff happens, situations change. People may lose eligibility for one Medicaid group, but there may be another one they could enroll in. Or perhaps they're not eligible for any of them right now in their current situation, but if they were working for pay, they could qualify for, say, MBIWPD, which would be another incentive for people to work. So, what's your job as a benefit professional? You want to consider whether likely changes to a person's situation, if they achieve their work goal, if they save money, um, if that would change their eligibility for Medicaid. Are they going to lose the Medicaid they have now? If so, estimate when that change is likely to occur and figure out whether they would qualify for a different Medicaid eligibility group and help them be sure they can transition into that other group so they keep Medicaid and all the services it provides. Those Medicaid transitions are absolutely essential for people we support. Okay, we're doing on time. We're okay. We should be able to finish this by 1 o'clock. But first, before we move into our next PowerPoint, which is much shorter, just wanted to ask if there are any questions or comments. You can type into the chat or come off mute. Not seeing or hearing anything. Okay. I know what this means. You're hungry. We will be done by 1 o'clock. So our post boot camp. Oh, wait a minute. Do we have something new in the chat? Oh, thank you, Maricela. I appreciate that. So let's move on to the next one. There are 4 other Medicaid eligibility groups I want you to be aware of, although they're not, in my experience, nearly as common or essential as the 6 that we've covered. And I want you to be aware of 4 Medicare savings programs and know what they do for people, as well as several Medicaid eligibility groups that also provide relief from out-of-pocket Medicare costs. So many of you have heard of something called the Pickle Amendment, and people who are eligible for it are known, God help them, as the pickle people, oftentimes. This is a Medicaid eligibility group for people who were receiving SSI and a Title II disability benefit, SSDI most commonly, or the CDB or DAC benefit, or disabled widows or widowers benefit. They lost SSI for any reason after June of 1977. And if it weren't for the cost of living increases that they got on their Title II benefit after their SSI stopped, they would still be eligible for SSI payments. This group requires a whole different training. It's rather complicated, but it does apply to some people who started out on SSI, lost it for any reason, but had a Title II benefit, at least they were eligible for SSI and the other benefit at least 1 month at the same time. And if you eliminated the cost of living increases they got after their SSI terminated, they would still be eligible for an SSI payment, and then they can get Medicaid through the Pickle Amendment. Very complicated, not commonly used. Um, Eligibility workers, even at Medicaid, often don't understand it. So um, it's well worth knowing about if you take a training on this. Um, but it's not one of our core groups, in my opinion. Second one is disabled widows and widowers. This is comparable to the DAC beneficiaries group, except instead of switching from SSI to DAC, it's for people who switched from SSI to disabled widows and widowers benefit. And they could keep Medicaid until they became eligible for Medicare. With DAC beneficiaries, you can keep that Medicaid group even after your Medicare starts, but not for the disabled widows and widowers group. There aren't all that many disabled widows and widowers who qualify for this group. And those who do only qualify for it for up to 2 years until their Medicare starts. So it's it's not that common a group, but definitely something for some people with disabilities that we at least want to be aware of. The next few groups, the Children's Medicaid and Child Health Plus, I threw in here not because of people that you're likely providing benefits planning for, but if they have kids and their kids don't have insurance, the kids might qualify for Children's Medicaid or Child Health Plus, which is New York's Children's Health Insurance Program known as CHIP. So for children 18 and under, they can qualify for Medicaid or Child Health Plus if they don't have other insurance. Children's Medicaid and Child Health Plus use the MAGI rules for counting income. The families modified adjusted gross income, or MAGI, has to meet certain limits. There are monthly premiums. You can find the dollar amounts of the income limits that apply to the various monthly premiums using the link at the bottom of slide 6. So again, you work with people who have kids. This is something to be aware of for their children. There are no co-pays for Child Health Plus. You do have to apply for it. And then finally, Medicaid for pregnant people. Some people you work with may be pregnant or may become pregnant and may qualify for Medicaid based on pregnancy. So Medicaid for pregnant people has no age requirement. Pregnant people of any age, their family MAGI income has to be under 223% of federal poverty. And Medicaid for pregnant people can continue for 60 days after the end of the pregnancy, however it ends. Okay. If a child is born from the pregnancy, the child will be covered by Medicaid for a year after they're born, regardless of their income. And you do have to apply for this one as well. Okay, just to wrap this up, I'm going to go through this rather quickly. Medicare is a benefit that we're familiar with that people get typically if they have, if they're disabled, they've been getting Social Security disability benefits, SSDI or DAC or disabled widows and widowers benefits for at least 2 years. There's the 2-year waiting period. for people getting Title II disability benefits before they become eligible for Medicare. And that's the most common way that people we're supporting get their Medicare, by receiving Social Security disability benefits and waiting 2 years. But most people in the country who get Medicare get it based on age, being at least 65 years old and having worked and paid Social Security taxes on their earnings in their earlier years. Okay. Um, so when a person gets Medicare, there are up to 4 parts to it. Part A is hospital insurance, also covers long-term care, like in nursing facilities for limited period, usually a couple months. Part B is outpatient medical coverage. Part A is required. That's kind of automatic. Part B is optional, but always a good idea for people to take it. Part C is totally optional. This is a way of hiring a private company to provide most or all of your Medicare services. It's typically known as Medicare Advantage plans. Um, Part D, also optional, is Medicare prescription coverage, which is provided by private companies through the Medicare program. Each part to Medicare usually involves out-of-pocket costs. They are summarized on the next few slides. Premiums, deductibles, coinsurance. A premium is typically a monthly amount that you have to pay for insurance or a part of the insurance. A deductible is an amount that you have to pay out of pocket before the insurance covers any of the expenses. And coinsurance is when the insurance covers a certain percentage and the individual has to pay the other 20%. With Medicare, that's commonly under Part B, the outpatient medical. Medicare will cover 80%, and the individual usually has to pay the 20% coinsurance. So there are various out-of-pocket costs involved for Medicare. However, there are some programs that will reduce or virtually eliminate the out-of-pocket Medicare costs. Really good for us to know about for our clients who get Medicare. If a person on Medicare qualifies for any of the Medicare savings programs, one is called Qualified Medicare Beneficiary, or QIMBY for short. The next is called Specified Low-Income Medicare Beneficiary, or SLIMB for short. And I hope some benefits planner creates a cartoon called Quimby and Slimby, because they sound like cartoon characters. That, or a diet plan for Slimby. The third one is Qualifying Individual, QI for short, also known as Slimby 2. And then there's another one that's somewhat different called Qualified Disabled and Working Individuals, QDWI, that we'll talk about momentarily. Plus, there are some Medicaid eligibility groups that we've already talked about that also reduce out-of-pocket Medicare costs. So let's look at those quickly, and then we're going to be calling it a day. So Qualified Medicare Beneficiary, QIMBY, is for people with countable income using the SSI rules of up to 100% of the federal poverty level. You can see the actual income limits for a single person or a married couple on slide 15. There's no resource limit for the Medicare savings programs, QIMBY, SLIMBY, and QI in New York, which is generous. Most other states do have a resource limit for those programs. And QIMBY does use the SSI rules for countable income. SLIMBY, very similar, except it's got a higher income. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. left out the most important part about Quimby. Quimby wipes out virtually all of the out-of-pocket costs for Medicare Part A and Part B, and it automatically qualifies a person for a full low-income subsidy, also known as extra help, for Part D, the prescription drug plans. So Quimby wipes out almost all of the out-of-pocket costs for Medicare. SLIMBY only pays the Medicare Part B premium, currently $185 a month for most people. Can be higher for people with very high incomes. But it also provides that automatic full subsidy for Part D. Has a higher income limit, 120% of federal poverty, no resource limit again. And qualifying individual, QI or SLIMBY 2, has an even higher income limit, 135% of federal poverty. And like SLIMBY, it covers only the Part B premium and provides the full low income subsidy for Part D. But you don't qualify for QI if you're eligible for any full Medicaid group. So if you get Medicaid, you can't get QI. And QI also has a limited budget. So sometimes people may not be able to enroll during certain times of the year if the budget has been exhausted. Okay. Now, if a person has full Medicaid through any of 4 eligibility groups we have talked about, they provide the same relief from Medicare costs as Quimby does. Wipe out virtually all the Part A and Part B costs. Also provide the full low income subsidy for Part D. And those groups are SSI, Pickle Amendment, DAC beneficiary, and 1619B. So if a person gets any of those, they'll act in the same way that Quimby does. Okay. Finally, the QDWI program, Qualified Disabled and Working Individuals program. This is probing your memory about your Medicare work incentives. There were 2 Medicare work incentives. So if a person worked their way off Social Security disability, there's one Medicare work incentive called the, excuse me, extended period of Medicare coverage that enabled people to keep Medicare without having to pay anything extra for it for years longer, at least 93 months after the end of their trial work period, and sometimes longer. If that period ends and the person is still medically disabled, they have not medically improved, then they can still keep Medicare, but they would usually have to pay an extra premium for it. And that's the Medicare Part A hospital insurance premium, which is, last I checked, I think it was maybe 285 a month for most people. So it's a significant cost. But the QDWI program pays that premium for people who are eligible. They have to have countable income using the SSI rules under 200% of federal poverty and countable resources under twice the SSI resource limits. That's 4,000 for a single person, 6,000 for a married couple. Okay. But the bread and butter here is those 6 key Medicaid eligibility groups. There are plenty of others, and you will run into situations where people may not qualify for any of those, but may be eligible for some of the others that we discussed or some that we haven't discussed. But those 6 are the most important in my experience for people getting benefits planning. Remember that in addition to all of the documents that we've used going through here, you've also got this medical benefits comparison chart. It's an Excel chart. It lists every one of the Medicaid eligibility groups we talked about, including the Medicare savings programs and Medicare, and provides lots of details about them. I find it's kind of a handy chart to have when you're reviewing details about any of the Medicaid eligibility groups. And wow, despite the 15 wasted minutes in the beginning when I didn't realize I was on mute, we made it. Still have a couple minutes left. If anyone has any questions or comments, I will stick around. Thank you very much for attending. If you're not familiar with the fact that we've got other state-specific benefits training modules, please go ahead and email someone and find out about when those are scheduled. The next one is on SNAP benefits, otherwise known as food stamps. After that, we've got HUD rental assistance programs, programs funded by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Not really a benefit that differs from state to state, but the national trainings don't have adequate time to cover it. So I've added it in. And we've got temporary assistance to needy families, known as just temporary assistance in New York. We've got unemployment and we've got workers' compensation, if you're interested in those. So thank you again for participating. And if anyone has any final questions or comments, please feel free to stick around and come off mute. Thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you, Michael. Great presentation, very useful. Love the resources.
Thank you, Maricela. Thank you for participating.